Well, I want to welcome you to our series on rogue prosecutors and the impact that their policies have had around the country. We're very pleased and honored to have the 33rd Sheriff of Los Angeles, California, the Honorable Alex Villanueva. Sheriff, it's an honor to meet you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for the invite, Curry. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So tell us a little about yourself. You grew up in Puerto Rico, born in the States. As I understand it from your bio, you then graduated from high school, went in the military. Why did you choose the military?
Well, I was in the University of Puerto Rico for 2 years. This is from 80 to 82. And Reagan was in office in his first term. He thought the Pell Grants were a little generous, so he cut them in half. And in Puerto Rico at that time, there's no such thing as part-time jobs and work your way through college. Either you have a full ride scholarship or you're not in college. So I enlisted in the Air Force. So early 83, I was there in Lackland Air Force Base, and having my world turned upside down. I wound up ultimately in Norton Air Force Base, California. So coming from Puerto Rico and joining the Air Force, you could be stuck in all kinds of weird places. So I said, okay, what are the warmest places? Okay, Florida, Texas, California. Roll of the dice, here I am.
Right.
Could have been in a different number, this conversation wouldn't be happening.
Right. And then you eventually joined the Sheriff's Department in 86.
Yes.
You affiliated with the Army or the Reserves at some point, though.
Yeah, I went from the Air Force to the Air Guard. I was one of the very first people in the program called Palace Chase, where they were trying to shrink the size of the military. And I wanted to go back to finish my college, so it was a perfect match. So I switched to the Air Guard, and then from there to the Army Guard, because I wanted to fly. But my eyesight in those days had to be 20/20, uncorrected. There was no such thing as LASIK or anything.
Right.
So they offered me a backseater job, and I was like, they were losing a plane a year into the side of the San Bernardino Mountains, the F-4 Phantoms, I think the E-4 variation of it. I was like, I'd rather be in charge of the plane, and then I'm okay with that if it crashes, but if I'm strapped to the back seat,
right.
No, I'll pass, hard pass. So I went to Army Officer Candidate School, and I was commissioned, then I was in field artillery the rest of my time in the military.
And you retired, well, you didn't retire, but you left the military and the reserve component, I suspect, because your job just got too busy in the Sheriff's Department.
Yeah, the demands being an officer with dark nights and organizing all of the events for the Muta 4s, Muta 5s, which are drills, short drills, longer drills, and you had to go up to Camp Roberts to fire our weapons. It was so much, and they kept pouring all these responsibilities, but no extra pay or benefits to it.
Right.
And I said, I need to go back to grad school. I think I'm done now for this. I got what I wanted out. I had a wonderful time in the military, and I enjoyed it, and I kept getting more and more assignments with more responsibility, and you did well. There was no ceiling on anything I did in the military.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought I was going to get in for one tour, and I retired in February after 30 years.
There you go.
You just keep getting jobs, but it does crowd out all the other stuff time-wise.
Yep.
So you got a college degree, you got a master's, and you got a doctorate. Where'd you take those degrees from?
Well, I finished my bachelor's because I was jumping around all over the place. University of the State of New York. In those days, it was called Regents College. They accepted a lot of the credits from all different places. So if you're in the military, it was a very popular program to get your degree, even though you bounced around, because that was your home school. So you take classes locally, but all the credits applied to your home school, which is Regents. So I finished that in 92. And then in 96, I did my master's at Cal State Northridge in public administration. Then 2002, I started the doctorate in public administration at the University of Laverne and finished it in 05.
And while you were a deputy sheriff, you also taught in university as an adjunct.
Yes, I taught once I graduated with my doctorate, I was an adjunct professor at Cal State Long Beach. I taught statistics, the dreaded class that nobody wanted, but I made it palatable. So I was the go-to professor to get that one knocked out of the way so people could graduate. And criminological theory, juvenile justice theory, and corrections. Those are the classes that I was teaching.
You miss teaching?
Oh, I always had a lot of fun teaching.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I enjoyed, I taught law school as an adjunct, and I really enjoyed it. So the purpose of this evening's chat is to explore criminal justice trends, reforms, and in specifically I want to drill down eventually to the policies of the current elected DA, George Gascon. He's a former police officer.
Mm-hmm. Not that his former colleagues recognize it, but yes.
Okay. And so at the Heritage Foundation, we focus on policy, not politics. We can't do politics. Our sister organization, Heritage Action for America, can do politics, but we don't. We focus on how policies impact people's lives. And Zach and I, my co-author, have said from the beginning, I want to see if you agree with this, that this progressive prosecutor movement nationally is not about left or right or conservative or liberal or blue or red states. It's really about whether you're for law and order or whether you're for chaos. Are we wrong?
Now you're on the right path in that description, because what they're trying to do is dismantle the criminal justice system as we know it, and using the false canard about systemic racism, mass incarceration, all these buzzwords that are in the political sphere. But when you go to the hard facts on the ground, my county jail is filled up by violence, not systemic racism. So when they try to push the idea, let's get rid of the jails and the prisons, the decarceration, it is. You're taking steps towards anarchy, towards communism, the big use of the word equity and everything. Equitable, well, should I release all the people that are in jail for murder based on their proper percentage in the community? I mean, that's kind of bizarre, but if you follow their logic, that's actually what they're pushing for.
Right. I'm glad you brought some of their euphemisms up. They always talk about reimagining this or reimagining that. When you joined the Sheriff's Department in '86, I went back and looked at the statistics nationally and here in California. There were thousands of murders in California. I mean, we've had a 25-year decline in violent crime across this country and a 25-year decline in incarceration. How can they be talking about mass incarceration when they've been going down for 25 years?
It's their favorite punchline, but when you realize that the majority of crime is committed by a very small percentage of people, focus on that small percentage. There's people that are rehabilitatable, and there's people that are just so dangerous in what they do and their pattern of doing that. I have no problem locking them up and keeping them there because I'm safeguarding the community, the people. That's my job as a sheriff. In '86, we were at the almost peaking on the crime wave of violent crime. About '92, I think, is when it crested.
Yep.
And then, exactly as you said, we had a steady 30-year decline that bottomed out, and unfortunately now we're on the backswing going up.
Yeah. The numbers were just amazing back at the peak.
Mm-hmm.
In LA, there were, from what I could tell, in '92, 1,092 murders. In New York City, 2,245 murders in '92. You fast forward in LA in 2012, only 298. Now that's 298 people, so that's 298 too many, but it's still down 800.
But you fast forward to 2021, we closed out last year with, I think, 287 murders.
Yeah.
In our jurisdiction.
Right.
LAPD had another 300 plus, so now we're over 600 between the two. Now we're creeping back to that 1,000 mark.
Yeah.
So we're on the wrong trend line.
So we have a national audience. Explain for the viewer the difference between Los Angeles Sheriff Department and LAPD.
Well, primary difference, well, there's two. One, I'm the elected sheriff. I represent all of Los Angeles County. The chief of police, LAPD, is appointed by the mayor, city council, police commission. They have a process.
Okay.
So he's appointed, I'm elected. There's 88 cities in LA County, and there's huge swaths of unincorporated county areas that has about 1 million residents. I provide public safety services to all the unincorporated residents. There's about 131 communities. 42 contract cities that contract with the Sheriff's Department. So the population that I have that is in our jurisdiction is about 3 million. LAPD has about 4 million in their jurisdiction, but they're in about, I think, 485 square miles. Ours is spread out over 4,000 square miles.
Wow.
So you can see the difference. But our essential function of the boots on the ground officers or deputies is identical. Your primary law enforcement, your first responders, you respond to 911 calls, they get dispatched, you go there, figure out what happened, if someone needs to go to jail, report needs to be taken, crooks need to be caught, stuff like that, people that are injured need to be helped, crime scenes secured. That's pretty much as consistent across the county.
Now, when you ran for office, it's the first time you ran for any public office, right?
I ran twice before.
Oh, you did? Okay. Well, this time you won.
Yes.
And you beat an incumbent, which is the first time that happened in LA County, right?
Since 104 years.
And you ran as a reformer.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about that.
Well, we had a long history of the political establishment and the sheriff at the time. The way they approached the job was very deferential, at least my predecessor, the one I defeated, was very deferential to the Board of Supervisors. He had no emotional investment in the organization because he wasn't from the organization. So it was easy for him to just sign letters that terminate people left and right without really making sure that there was due process involved, that the procedural rights were honored. It wasn't there. So I inherited like 66 wrongful termination lawsuits, and the ability of the department to recruit and retain people had just disappeared because we were losing on average 200 a year, and they couldn't fill the academy classes because bottom line, if you're a jerk of an employer, you're not going to attract people.
Right.
Your own people are not going to recruit to come join the misery. So we changed that election night. As soon as I was sworn into office, we instituted a lot of policies and we gave direction to everyone that, hey, be a good employer, have decisions based on evidence and facts, given everyone the opportunity. We did the same thing with the community because I had a concept of truth and reconciliation. We knew there was problems in employment decisions, but there were also concerns about decisions that impacted cases. And those, we did two in particular that took a lot of time and energy, and that was the Mitrice Richardson disappearance that happened in 2009 in Malibu. And then there was a guy named John Horton, and he was an inmate who was alleged to have committed suicide in the county jail. And that was also about, I think, from 2011, over 10 years old. In both cases, we had them re-investigated entirely with a whole new team of investigators. We assigned a internal affairs and an internal criminal investigator. If there was any potential criminal misconduct, anybody trying to conceal anything or put their thumb on the scales. And I mean, that was an exhaustive review of everything. And this generated a whole new, basically, book of each case. And we present all information to the families, the next of kin, and so that was a promise, and we did. And whatever result was, we were going to take action on. But it turns out the original result didn't change.
So when you got elected, you had a gap in the number of people who were in the sheriff's department. You hired over 1,000 people,
Mm-hmm.
and then eventually, from what I can tell from reading articles, that the relationship between you or your office and the County Board of Supervisors got a little frosty in terms of funding. And as I read it, tell me what I read that's wrong, is even though you followed through on your campaign promises, you removed ICE from the jails, you rejected the state criminal alien assistance funding from the federal government, which you called blood money. And you got money for body-worn cameras, which I think most of us who are reform-minded think that's a great thing for everyone involved. The funding for the number of academy classes went down dramatically year after year.
Mm-hmm.
And that's on the County Board of Supervisors. It went from, Well, tell us what. I mean, it went all the way down to what, 3 classes?
3 classes. 2001 and 2002, it went down to 3 classes.
You mean
So-
21 and 22?
21 and 22, both years, 3
Yeah.
classes only. And
From a high of 12.
yes, and remember, the 12 was just to get us back to what we had lost to get back to full staffing model. We achieved it. We were almost close to it. We got to 9,985 was our high water mark. The goal was 10,300. We were on pace until they started freezing our ability to hire. They defunded the department on multiple occasions. They took out 1,281 positions that were already budgeted. They just removed them from our budget. And then, with the hiring freeze now, as of Friday, we're down 927 positions because we haven't been able to replace them as they retire.
So when you hear folks saying there's no defunding of the police or sheriffs, that's just not true.
Oh, that's a flat out lie. That is basically the board trying to spin, because they said, oh, our budget went from 3.54 million to 3.61. Hey, you see, we increased his budget. But if I'm down 2,208 employees and my expenses grew by more than 300 million, and you're giving me that little difference, you defunded my department.
And I saw your 2021 year in review press conference, and you put out a really good slide deck, which is available on the Sheriff's Department website. One of the things that struck me as a former prosecutor is they cut funding for the crime lab.
Oh, yes.
So you can't process, even though they're railing about guns and ghost guns, and there are ghost guns out there, and that's a problem, you can't do the forensics because you're down a whole bunch of people in the crime lab.
We are down 22, I think, plus another 14 that retired at the end of March. And we have not, since I've been in office now, 3.5 years, we have not hired a single crime lab staff member.
And what's the impact of that?
Well, now our DNA backlog is racking up. Big problem right there. Our questionable documents, our firearms, NIBIN, which is a national database, for ballistics testing.
Right.
And that's how the investigators get to, connect the dots between the crook who owned the gun and the crime. This is important stuff for solving crimes. And we cannot get anybody into any of these positions. And it's anywhere from 3 to 5 years, just the certification process for each one of these crime lab or CSI specialists. And on top of that, you need another 5 or 6 years to be a really competent, seasoned crime and your CSI specialist that can testify in court reliably, do their job according to all the standards that are required of them.
Right.
By freezing us out for 3.5 years, they've really damaged the capacity of our crime lab to do their function, eliminated the potential of having our new employees be mentored by the outgoing people. So we have a loss of institutional knowledge, a brain drain that's going on, and they just don't care. They're physically trying to damage and sabotage the operation at every opportunity they get.
So that's got to demoralize not only the people in the crime lab who can't keep up with the volume that they need to be keeping up with, but also people who aspire to be deputy sheriffs who want to get through the pipeline, but there's just only so many openings in the academies.
Right. We take all the applications we can, and they limited our ability to take application in. Great candidates, local from our own LA County, because we don't take them out of county or out of state.
That was one of your reforms.
That was one of our reforms.
Yep.
We're talking about our Latinos, Latinas, Black, Asian, Pacific Islanders from every walk of life you can think of. They're there waiting to be hired. They expire and they move on to another job because we didn't give it to them.
And a good number of these folks are veterans like you and me.
Yes, a boatload of them are veterans. And we probably have the most diverse law enforcement agency in the entire nation right now. From the very top to the very entry level, we're about to cross the 20% mark in females, which I don't think there's any agency in the nation, large one, that's ever nowhere even close to that. The national average is only like 12%.
I want to pivot now and spend the rest of our time together, Sheriff, on the DA, the policies of the DA, and the frustrations, which you haven't been shy about. You're on Twitter. I've pulled some of your tweets. I think people applaud you at your ability to just be frank and speak out. When Gascon, who had been the DA in San Francisco, came down here and ran against Jackie Lacey, the first black or African-American female Democrat elected DA, what was your relationship, what was your office relationship like with Jackie Lacey?
At the very beginning, it was kind of, she had one case out there where they were investigating straw donors to my campaign, and I think that was the political establishment kind of asking her to, hey, let's throw a little shade on the new guy coming in. And of course it went nowhere because there was no basis.
But I'm saying
for it.
on the basic day-to-day operation with your deputies dealing with the deputy DAs.
Great. They had great direction from the top, from Jackie Lacey. We met on a quarterly basis. I'd go up to her floor. She'd come down to visit ours. We'd exchange information, caseload, particularly deputy-involved shootings and officer-involved shootings that we investigated that we needed the DA to come up with a decision.
Yep.
And that was always the big thing. What do we do with that? Then along came the Brady List issue. How do we resolve the Brady List? I mean,
and Brady, just so you know, is for our viewers, is Brady against Maryland is a Supreme Court case that says that the government must turn over to the defense any potentially exculpatory information.
correct. And that was from 1963. So there's different things in California that have kind of impacted that, how it's interpreted and implemented locally. And
you have a state statute on that too.
there's a state statute. There was
Yeah.
several court decisions that went all the way up to the California Supreme Court
Yeah.
that says I can share this. However, the obligation rests with prosecution. So we don't have an obligation to create a list, and we're not, but we're sharing every single case with the prosecution, and then they can disseminate to the defense.
Now, you're a Democrat, and as I understand it, the entire Democratic establishment for years was behind Jackie Lacey. They backed her. The senators, the mayor, the governor, and then something happened. What happened?
That was that weird moment in history where she had the endorsement of the LA County Democratic Party. Then overnight, something changed, and there was a rush to change the rules and get George Gascon propped up and endorsed over her, which was just appalling. And
Well, especially given his track record in San Francisco's DA. I mean, he was a failure if you look at the crime rates.
But 2020 was the year of George Floyd, civil unrest, all cops are bastards, F12, everything you can think of.
What's F12?
That's basically F the police, but 12. That's kind of...
Okay. It's a euphemism for...
Yeah, that's part of the lingo, the street
expletive.
lingo.
Okay.
Right. And then Black Lives Matter LA and nationally, they were trying to sell the idea that all cops are racist. And
Has that been your experience?
No, definitely not.
It's not been my experience, but I
No.
wanted to ask you.
But we were all slave catchers or descendants of slave catchers. That's how they were selling it. We were responsible for mass incarceration, systemic racism, and there was a Derek Chauvin in every single department, on every shift.
Now, what percentage of your force are minorities?
About 74%.
So you're a majority minority force.
We're a majority Latino organization. 54% of our sworn are Latino. When we go to the professional staff, the numbers go even bigger. And then we have about white, non-Hispanic is about 25% roughly. 24, 25%.
When whatever happened, and the whole thing switched, and they went behind they backed Gascon, and Gascon is clearly getting all of the support. And I remember that time, and I remember people starting to predict that he was going to win, and it almost seemed to us from the outside that Jackie Lacey almost gave up. I'm not asking you to comment on that. Did Gascon, the putative frontrunner, reach out to you and get your input, either before he was elected or after he was elected, to get your input on what's happening on the street and the way we can work together?
Never. His input, as far as I understood, only came from Black Lives Matter leadership, national leadership, the local chapter, Black Lives Matter LA. Public defenders, that whole group from the Bay Area. He actually brought people down from the Bay Area to L.A.
Yeah, we wrote about him at length and listed his advisory group when he got elected, and there were no career prosecutors there. It was all...
In fact, they purged his executive staff, leadership staff were purged of all career prosecutors, those that had institutional loyalty. People telling him, hey, okay, you're in charge, there's reform, but there's a way you can implement responsibly reforms that have the greatest impact and the greatest long-term sustainability. That person was removed from office as well. So he was not hearing it.
He gets elected on this day, and then there's a few weeks before he gets sworn in. It was during that time, as we've written about, that he put together this group to study all these reforms. The day he gets sworn in, moments after he gets sworn in, he issues this blizzard of so-called special directives, which are basically orders, and we know as military guys, they're direct orders to his deputy DAs. I want to go through some of them with you, because you know all of them. No enhancements or allegations. Later in this symposium, we're going to talk to deputy DAs about that. But from the law enforcement perspective, how'd that strike you?
It was like, wow, this person is trying to eliminate consequences from things that had already been decided by the state legislature. That in essence, that's nullification of the legislative intent by doing end run around it and ignoring it. And the amount of things that were being removed as enhancements, particularly in guns and crimes, gang enhancements, multiple victims enhancements, and death penalty enhancements, life without, juveniles that cannot be prosecuted as adults. All these things in combination just drop down the consequence level to the point. There was a video, you've probably seen it, the guy's toasting white lightning in the state prison because they're going to get a Gascon release.
Yeah, they're toasting the Gascon directive, and they have white lightning, which is sort of moonshine in the jail.
Yep.
I don't. They were in Pelican Bay or upstate somewhere.
Up there.
Yep. Dropping misdemeanors and some wobblers, which are charges that could be charged as felony or misdemeanors. Pretrial release. What was the impact on the morale in your department, and what was the impact in reality to the communities you serve there?
Well, the community saw it really close and personal. Smash and grab robberies, grand theft auto up 60% in 2 years. We had one cat got arrested 3 times in one day for grand theft auto. There was no consequences. And it's just astonishing the level of, because remember, when the civil unrest happened, he wasn't into office yet. But all of that brew that came out of that whole civil unrest and justice and everybody chanting in the streets, he carried that. The Board of Supervisors enabled him because all about reimagining public safety. So part of it was the decarceration movement. Let's get people out of jail. And somehow the community, there's going to be alternatives to incarceration. They have Office of Diversion and Reentry, all these programs, Care First, Jail Last, everything coming out of the board. He fit right into the plan perfectly because he was now delivering what the board had been selling since I've been in office as sheriff.
Now, George Gascon was one of the co-sponsors of Prop 47.
Yes.
Tell folks what Prop 47 was and how it's played out as a disaster.
Well, the title of it, I think, it has something to do with the Making California Safer. And it's been the exact opposite. It's been an utter disaster. It lowered the consequence level for a lot of crimes. It made felonies into misdemeanors. Drug possession, things like that used to be felonies.
So it used to be a 3-year felony for certain drug possession.
And the important thing of it is it allowed us to get people into drug court, into diversion, then out of jail, but now they're in a residential treatment program to avoid the jail.
Yeah, and you're a fan of drug court, right?
Yes,
I'm a fan of drug court.
We lost the carrot and the stick, totally.
So you had no incentive, if you were one of these dudes, once Prop 47 passes, to even go to drug court.
No, he said, hey, you're crowding your jails, they're going to let me out right away.
And they also reduced the dollar value for theft from felony to misdemeanor.
Felony to misdemeanor, they took it from $400 to $950, what constituted misdemeanor theft, and 666 of the penal code. Petty theft with a prior, which was a felony, just wiped off the books totally. So now you can do the same charge over and over again, and that's why you can walk into Nordstrom, grab an entire rack, and walk out with it, and it doesn't go anywhere. Then, he was a co-author of Prop 47. That's on one side. But then he becomes DA of LA, and even the lower threshold of everything that he authored, he doesn't prosecute.
Right.
Which means he's legalized theft. He's legalized prostitution. He's legalized pimping. He's legalized sex offenders not having to register.
Yeah. And one of the huge pushes that was bipartisan years ago was the Walsh Act, which set up the Sex Offender Registration Notification Act, SORNA. And if you're convicted of a Tier 1, 2, or 3 sex offense, you then have to register either for a short period of time, a medium period of time, or for life. And I know you don't have a law degree, but you are a PhD. You're Dr. Villanueva. What authority under the state constitution does any elected DA have to ignore the law?
None.
Right.
None at all.
Zero.
In fact, since I've taken office, the political establishment has done everything possible, throwing the kitchen sink at me, defunding me, delegitimizing our entire department's operation, discrediting the good work we're doing, defanging us at every moment, yet we've always done our job.
So this state is famous for referenda. We watch from other states and just sort of like, wow, that's another California thing.
Yes.
Of course, everyone loves to come to California. A lot of great things come from California. The voters have been asked recently whether they, as a state, should abolish bail. And they've said no, right?
Now, there's a story behind that. I was in favor of abolishing bail if we moved to the algorithm, which was going to be its substitute. Because basically, if you're in jail, it's because you represent a threat to society. I'm okay with that. Having to have a financial calculation for it doesn't really make sense, because if you got the money, you can walk out and you're a threat. If you don't have the money, it's for a minor crime, you're in jail. That made no sense, and we were all for that. But Black Lives Matter and the progressive movement decided that any algorithm that is used is going to be discriminatory against people of color because they're overrepresented in the criminal justice system.
Do you think that's true?
Oh, hell no. They're exactly represented based on their actions that get them there.
And in your experience, set aside in the Navy we had some bad eggs, in the Air Force, Army there's some bad eggs, very small number of people, I'm sure there are in all walks of life here in California. California is no different than anywhere else. But in your experience, your officers who are properly trained, are they arresting people because of the color of their skin?
I've yet to see that. They're arresting them because of the dumb stuff that they're doing.
Right, so they arrest them based on the action they take.
Yes.
The violation of the California Penal Code. One of the things that really, I think, has hit a chord around the country when they're watching what's happening here with Gascon and these other rogue DAs is the death penalty is legal in California. It's not really carried out anymore because of gubernatorial action. But Gascon just says we're not going to file any cases capital through one of his directives. But he's not even going to let his deputy DAs go to parole hearings and represent the interests of the people and the victims. That rubbed you the wrong way. You wrote him a letter. Tell us about that.
We wrote him a letter that was not acceptable to us. In our cases, we will send our investigators to the parole hearings to represent the victim because we don't want them to be alone in the process. It can be very hostile for a victim to have to confront the person that killed their loved one or assaulted them, raped them, whatever. And the defendant, or the convicted defendant, who's trying to petition for release, is going to tell a story about how wonderful he is, what a reformer he is, or how reformed he is, or minimizing his culpability in the crime. The only thing that brings the panel back to reality is the deputy district attorney, or now my investigator, saying, well, no, this is actually what happened.
Yeah, and here's the pictures, and here's the crime scene investigation,
Yes.
here's the thing he said afterwards, to remind them of what really happened. In fact, you gave an interview on February 3rd, 2021, in relation to the case of Howard Elwin Jones, a convicted double murderer. And when Gascon wouldn't let a deputy DA go up there for the parole hearing. You said, quote, "The victim's voice needs to be heard," unquote.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why you're sending your folks up there in appropriate cases.
We're, but again, remember we're responsible for about a third of the arrests in LA County. LAPD has another third, and all the other independent police departments account for the last third. So we can impact the 1/3 that we investigated. We've offered this to all the chiefs of police. Hey, you need to do the same. However, they don't have the freedom of the elected sheriff to do that. They have to go through the permission layers of their overseers, and they put a total squash on that. So that's why we remain the only ones representing.
One of the things we've seen around the country, Sheriff, as we've been studying this movement and meeting folks like you and other people across the political spectrum, is this happened in Philadelphia, it's happened in Baltimore, it's happened in Boston, it's happened in Chicago, it's happened in St. Louis. When there's a rogue DA, when there's a rogue prosecutor, and certain cases that cry out for justice just aren't getting prosecuted, the police establishment take it across the street to the U.S. Attorney's Office. And if they can find a federal nexus, and it's appropriate given their resources, they take it to the feds. You did that in this case where a very promising young officer with the last name Arroyos was executed by 4 gang members. Tell us about that.
Well, that happened in our Century Area's jurisdiction. Him and his girlfriend were shopping for a house. They were going through the neighborhood because they're doing the smart thing that kids know. One thing is to see a place in the daytime, but you also have to go at night to see what it looks like. So they're out there.
Good advice.
And I'm off-duty cop with a gun. He thinks, all right, I can defend ourselves. And they became a victim of a street robbery, just for, I think, 2 silver chains. And he ended up getting shot. He died as a result of it. And we talked to the deputy DA who responded to the scene, and the information we got is that per Gascon's directives, they were only going to do a simple murder, 187, nothing else.
Yeah, and 187 is Penal Code Section 187 of the California Penal Code, which is the homicide statute.
Right. And but we were appalled by that because this is 4 gangsters, armed, robbery in furtherance of the gang, all the qualifications for a gang enhancement, and multiple victims. And fortunately, and again, just like you said, the FBI had the resources and a task force addressing violent street crimes in that area. So we hit them up, hey, we have a case, would you be willing to take it? And they ran with it.
Right, and just so everyone understands, the United States Attorney, there's 94 of them around the country, they can only charge cases under Title 18 of the U.S. Code.
Yes.
Right, so there has to be a federal nexus. So they can't just, even if they wanted to, they just can't reach down and prosecute any murder that's happening. There has to be a federal nexus so that it falls into the federal jurisdiction. But if you had a real prosecutor as opposed to a rogue prosecutor who just was enforcing the law as written, for Officer Arroyos, you would have a gang enhancement, you would have a gun allegation, you would have multiple murder allegation. So if convicted, and of course they're presumed innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt by clear and competent evidence, but if they're convicted, then the sentence exposure is what they deserve. And it's much more than a 187, which would be, what, 15 to life? And what are you really going to serve in a 15 to life sentence in California these days?
Probably 7.5 on the first offense.
So you get to whack somebody execution style and you serve 7 years. And you're protected by the gangs in prison.
And we already seen the track record of Gascon prior to this incident, because we had the murder of Whittier officer Keith Boyer. It was already in the system, and he downgraded and removed the death penalty from the case. Did the same thing with our sergeant, Steve Owens, who was murdered in Lancaster, on duty, executed. He took the death penalty off the table. and left the families squandering for what was left. So along comes Fernando Arroyo, that tragedy. He was like, we're not going to give him the opportunity to do that. So we were fortunate, but you're right, that option is not always going to be available, only in certain circumstances.
Yeah. But the U.S. Attorney has taken this, the L.A. U.S. Attorney,
Yes.
who is, this is the Biden administration, this is the Democratic administration, but for professional law enforcement people, party politics plays no role in this, right? This is just a pure what's right and what's wrong. So
Yes.
you just get the job done to serve the interests of the people and the interests of justice.
Yes, exactly. There's no virtue signaling here. You're just applying the law as it was written, and you're enforcing it.
Well, speaking of virtue signaling, during your 2021 press conference in January of this year, for your year in review for last year, you had some pretty frank things to say about the County Board of Supervisors, and I want to read something you said, and I want to get your explanation for what you meant. You said they, quote, need to knock off all the virtue signaling that's going on over there and start doing hard decisions based on facts that are going to make the community safer, unquote. What were they doing, and what do they need to knock off?
Well, they took $100 million from our budget, which is already depleted. They sent it over to a unit called Measure J, a measure that they put on the ballot in the heat of the civil unrest period because they wanted to reimagine public safety and reinvest. That's another fair word. Let's reinvest into the community and away from harmful carceration policies. So this is the language they're speaking. So Measure J was ruled unconstitutional. They kept the money, and they just called it, well, it's going to be our community investment fund. Then they created the Justice, Care, and Opportunities Department. Really Orwellian name. Yeah, that's actually the name of this department they created.
And who's getting these opportunities?
Only the people they term, I guess, politically meets all their...
Acceptable
to them. And I call it We Just Don't Care department. And it's just bizarre because they're putting program after program together with no accountability, no transparency, and everyone they assign to these are the people that work all the 501c3s from all these people demanding justice. And so it's just a big rabbit hole. They're throwing money down with no accountability as they're defunding law enforcement that keeps people alive on the street. So I had to call them out. I mean, alternatives to incarceration, Office of Diversion and Reentry, Public Safety Realignment Team, Jail Closure Implementation Team. They want to close Men's Central Jail with no replacement, nowhere to park 4,500 of the worst offenders in the nation. They're just going to do it. And they set aside $40 million into that we could use. But now it's sitting in an account going nowhere because their own consultant they hired to close the jail told them, you can't close the jail unless there's an alternative. But they ignore them.
We have just a couple minutes left, Sheriff, and I really do appreciate you sitting down with us because this, I think, gives our folks really a great insight into what's happening and the challenges you and your officers have, and thank you for your service. And if you could thank your officers for us for their service, we'd appreciate that. You mentioned in your January interview of this year that in Gascon's first year in office, the DA's office refused to prosecute 12,000 cases where your deputies arrested a person for a violation of California law.
It's under account. The actual number, I got it today, 13,238.
So one of his directives was no juveniles, that's a person under 18, get to be prosecuted in adult court. Of course, you get freebies for under $950 if you steal. What's the message to the criminal? The cumulative message to the criminal on the street and the gang members who recruit youths to join the gang, what's the message to them from Gascon's policies in total?
It's profitable to do crime in Los Angeles County. We're having people out of county, out of state, coming here to LA to do home invasion robberies, burglaries. In fact, we have foreign nationals coming here to do burglaries.
So it's a green light.
Oh yeah, total green light. We have posses of kids, juveniles, brazenly doing robberies, taking expensive watches out of people in Beverly Hills, places like that, to the point that the city of LA is now telling people don't wear expensive jewelry. What kind of message are we sending? We're creating a dystopian society as we speak, and it's all because of decisions made by politicians.
The last question I have for you is, Zach Smith and I are writing a book on the rogue prosecutor movement. It'll be out in the fall, hopefully. One of the things that the publisher asked us to do, and we've written a lot about it, was to dig deeper and find out the origins, beliefs, and the playbook for this movement, which started in about 2014. And it goes back, honestly, to the abolitionist movement in our country. And two of the thought leaders in this are Angela Davies and Patrisse Cullors. I'm going to read you two quotes from them. And I just want to get your reaction to them. And try not to laugh out loud. Okay, so I'll let you stop drinking your Coca-Cola there. You don't want to spit it out all over me. Angela Davis says, and she wrote a book called Are Prisons Obsolete, which is popular among the way folks way over there. Quote, imagine a world without prisons, unquote. And Patrisse Cullors says, quote, we should, quote, be getting rid of police, prisons, and jails, surveillance, and courts, unquote. Dr. Villanueva, reaction to that?
Well, first, wow. Second, Patrisse Cullors was a two-bit race hustler that would but would be out there with a clipboard in front of a men's central jail in Twin Towers trying to get people to sign her petitions as they were released from custody or whatever she was doing. And that was her start. And this is going back 20 years. I guess her brother was in and out of county jail.
Correct.
And everything that happened to him is because of the fault of law enforcement. That is, she's an avowed Marxist, communist, just like several other members of the Black Lives Matter leadership who've been very busy buying mansions, apparently, and doing other things with the money than helping the people they claim to represent. So it's appalling, disgusting, and they're literally the schoolyard bully who's trying to make bullying a safe practice, because they're also in the schools with student groups screaming at the school boards to get rid of cops on school grounds, because they want to make the safe place for bullies to practice their art. Just like they're advocating getting rid of cops on the trains and the subways, replacing them with unarmed ambassadors. This movement is well financed, and you know where some of the tentacles go to, and they're out deploying their tactics everywhere. Now, reality is starting to catch up to them, and I hope 22 is that year where it totally catches up. But that mentality doesn't surprise me at all. I've heard variations of that coming from them, that whole decarceration crowd, and absolutely reject it. And I think the public is starting to realize they're in, I don't know if I can use this technical term, but they're full of shit.
I'll look that up. Yeah. Sheriff, thank you very much.
You got it.
Thanks for your service.
All right.
And we'll stand by for the next panel.